Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Electrification Academy. So, the Academy is a series of webinars on how to enable electrification. My name is Marion Santini. I work for the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP. RAP is a global independent NGO, and our aim is to advance policy innovation and thought leadership in the energy community. Today, we will be talking about high electricity prices, which are a barrier to electrification in many countries. And I have asked RAP's Europe Director, Louis Sunderland, to join us today. Louis has been looking at this issue with other colleagues at RAP. Louise, you have looked at what is needed to reduce electricity prices. Why is it so important for electrification?
Thanks, Marion. I don't think there could be a more important topic to be talking about right now, could there? And you're right, electricity prices, I think, really are key to sort of underpinning our future. What we know, we're here on the Electrification Academy, right? We know that we have, honestly, for most sectors, electric solutions like heat pumps, electric vehicles, lots of solutions in the industrial sector are really the technical pathway for the future for these sectors. And I think it's that certainty, from that certainty, it's a small step to realise, therefore, that the prices of electricity underpin almost everything in this electrified future. So, the future energy bill is an electricity bill, and therefore even relatively small differences in electricity prices can make really quite a big difference when they're multiplied over many, many, many kilowatt hours as we're using more electricity to power more things. And importantly, right now, I think where electricity prices are in many countries in Europe is that they are not really supporting making the running of electric equipment cheaper than the counterfactual, cheaper than the incumbent kind of fossil fuel equipment. And the good news there is there are several things that governments can do. And this is something we've been working on in RAP very, very hard recently. We've recently come out with a kind of 8-point plan of priority actions. I will say it's maybe going to take more than 8 things, but these are our top 8 picks for the things that governments could do now. And those 8 things really revolve around reducing system costs overall. And this is, of course, a lot about making sure market design is implemented well, the resources we have are used to best effect, and then also allocating those costs once we've reduced them as far as we can, fairly and efficiently. But I think what we identified was that the most immediate thing that governments can do to make an absolute big impact on people's bills today for affordability, but also to give a boost for competitiveness to some of Europe's industry, is to address the taxes added to bills and the policy costs added to bills. And this is, a bit of a complex area. It's very specific to each country. So I'm really delighted that you've invited the speakers, and we have Chris and Angelos here today, because I think they're coming from geographies where there's been a lot of attention and some really creative solutions. So delighted to be talking to them today.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Louise. And before we move to our speakers, I should just let you know that the session today is being recorded. You can put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom page, and we will get back to them after the 2 presentations. So let's start. So we are very happy to welcome speakers, Chris Galpin, Angelos, Koutsis. Thank you so much for joining us. Chris, we'll start with you. You are a senior policy advisor for think tank E3G. You are part of the UK energy transition team, and you have also worked for the UK government in the past. So, can you tell us a few words about what you do at E3G?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a senior policy advisor in E3G's UK energy team. So E3G is an independent climate change think tank, and I lead our work in the UK on heating bills and heat pump affordability.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks a lot for joining us. Now, moving to Angelos. Angelos, you are a policy expert on energy efficiency and green heat for the Bond Better Leefmilieu, the umbrella organization of environmental and climate NGOs in Flanders. Could you tell us what you do there?
Hi everyone, and very good pronunciation on your side, Marion. BBL in short. So BBL is an umbrella organization of all the environmental and climate NGOs, in Flanders, Belgium, and we represent them. And I work in the energy transition team, let's say. We work on decarbonizing houses, on gas phase out, and energy policies in general.
Thanks a lot, Angelos, and thanks for the compliment about my Flemish pronunciation. I've been living here for 20 years in Brussels, but still not very good at Flemish language. So now let's move to the presentation time. So I will remind our participants that if they have questions during the presentations, please put them into the Q&A box. So we will get back to these questions at the end of the two presentations, unless I notice there is an immediate need for clarification. And in that situation, I will make sure we make these clarifications that are needed. So, I mean, I suggest we start with Chris. So, Chris, you have done some very interesting work on how taxes and levies could be adjusted in the UK to lower electricity prices. Could you tell us about this work and why it is important for E3G?
Thanks very much, Marion. Yes, so as Marion's mentioned, we've done some work in the UK on reducing electricity prices. So I'm going to talk through that over the next 10 minutes. Yeah, and I've already mentioned who E3G are, but I want to start with the kind of context in the UK, which is that we have some of the highest electricity bills in Europe. And not just that, we also relatively have relatively low gas prices in Europe, which means our electricity to gas price ratio is one of the highest out there. And for the reasons that Louise set out earlier, this is a real challenge for electrification, because you know, if you have the choice between a gas-fueled appliance and an electrical appliance, that gas price ratio is really important, and it might deter you from making the electrification choice. Yeah, I mean, the reason why that choice is so important is that electrification is absolutely critical to decarbonisation. So this graph here is from the 7th carbon budget. So effectively, this is part of the UK's plan for how we achieve decarbonisation in the UK. And I've just highlighted there, those 3 boxes account for industry, buildings, and surface transport. And you know, not necessarily all, but the vast majority of those savings are going to come from either, you know, efficiency or electrification. So electrification is going to be a huge part of how we decarbonize the country over the upcoming time window, you know, for all the way through to 2040 and beyond. And I think another key aspect of this is not just from the financial incentives of, well, understanding that a gas appliance is going to cost you more to run it over the long term than an electrical appliance, and that kind of financially minded decision. There's some really important politics here of understanding, you know, for the wider population, that electrification is going to bring lower bills, and that decarbonisation and lower bills are part of the same agenda. So it's really important that we can make that kind of compelling cost case. And the graph here on the right is from a briefing we did earlier this year that looked at all the different options you have to reduce running costs for electric heating, so for heat pumps. And we found you could potentially make it so that heat pumps halve running costs for heating relative to a gas boiler. But crucially, that journey starts by dealing with levies on electricity. So I've talked a bit about electricity costs in the UK. A key part of those electricity costs come from levies, which are taxes on electricity applied by UK government to apply to pay for a range of policies. They could be social policies, they could be environmental policies, they could be policies that are more kind of industrial development focused. And these levies drastically increase electricity prices and significantly increase the ratio of electricity costs to gas costs. Now, I'll come back to at the end. There is increasing attention in the UK on other areas of the energy bill and where else we can reduce costs. But the reason levies have been such a focus of campaigning and thinking for so long is that government holds really clear responsibility for these taxes that are placed on electricity bills. And crucially, it has the power to remove them. Now, it has the power to remove them, but one of the challenges here is whether or not it can be made politically viable for the UK to remove them, and whether there's the kind of whether you can enable the political action to do so. So the situation as it was in the UK is there were two kind of leading options, I guess, that were under consideration. One is that you could remove levies from electricity, but those costs still need to be paid for. So the idea was you could pay for them through government spending or government debt. But this had a few challenges, not least of which is that the UK is in quite a challenging fiscal situation. And so government is concerned about whether or not they can afford to remove levies from electricity and put them into taxation. The other challenge is political. So this is backed by consumer groups and some environmental groups, but it wasn't universally backed. And the price tag for this option, just for domestic electricity bills alone, is somewhere in the region of £5 billion a year, and potentially in the realms of 10 to 12 billion if you include industrial electricity consumption as well. So that was one option. The other option that was under consideration avoids some of those government expenditure costs, because this option looked at moving levies from electricity onto gas bills instead. And this has an additional benefit if your motivation is decarbonisation, because it not only reduces electricity costs, but it increases gas costs. So your impact on the ratio of electricity to gas prices, which is that key ratio for decision making on when electrification is appealing, that impact is doubled. So sounds great from a kind of environmental economist opinion, but the challenge here is that the impact on consumers, many of whom use gas for heating, was seen as being quite politically unpopular. It was opposed by many consumer groups. So for many years, the UK has been stuck in this stalemate where government, industry, and consumer groups all agree that we need to remove levies from electricity. But whether you pay for them via government spending or whether you move them onto gas bills has been a challenge, and neither of these options have had political support. I have to say that there are some rumblings that may change in the near future, but for now, that's broadly been the case. So where E3G came at this from is we looked at this situation and said, is there a third option? Is there a way that we can remove levies from electricity whilst dealing with this challenge of where do you find the funding to do that? And the option that my colleagues came up with a couple of years ago was to look at a targeted option. So you say, okay, we need to make particularly electric heating more affordable. Is there an intervention we can deliver that removes levies from electric heating, but leaves levies in place on other aspects of the electricity bill? And this option is inherently a compromise because it doesn't help electrification of transport. It doesn't help electrification of industry, and it doesn't reward consumers using other electrical appliances. But what it does do is it targets the really challenging political point of electric heating affordability, and it says we can compromise on some of those other things as long as we see actions here. And the advantage of this option is that we found the cost of this would be about £390 million per year, rather than £5 billion per year for removing levies from all electricity bills. So it offered an alternative, a compromise option that says, look, this is what we most need to happen. Can we do this as kind of an interim measure until we can fully remove levies from all electric heating? And I'd say so far, this has been an option that we've had quite good reception with UK government. And and we'll have to wait and see. I was hoping by the time of this presentation, we would have seen the UK government's Warm Homes Plan and would be able to say that this option has been taken forwards in UK government strategy. Unfortunately, that hasn't quite happened, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to update on that in the coming weeks or months. But yeah, I think the learning for other countries across Europe is ideally one of the other options is kind of preferable from a pure policy solution. But this option is worth considering if you're in a situation where there's a bit of a stalemate in terms of how do you remove levies from bills and put them somewhere else. So it's worth having as a tool in the toolkit, even if it is a compromise. And then just one final thought from me before I hand over is we also need to look beyond levies. I mentioned earlier that levies make up about 20% of the electricity bill in the UK. And whilst they are an area that is ripe for action and for exploration, we should also be thinking about what other areas of the energy bill we can tackle as energy systems, increasingly transition to be quite different to how they operated, only a few years ago. And as we move to a more renewable dominated grid, as we are in the UK, are there other areas that we have opportunities to reduce costs? And so I'd encourage, if you're interested in this, E3G also published a report in January of this year where we identified several other areas that we felt UK electricity bills could be reduced and found the potential for some really quite substantial additional savings. Great. So thanks very much. I will hand back now and looking forward to the Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I mean, it's really an interesting proposal here, and I really like what you said about making sure that decarbonization and lower bills are part of the same agenda. So thanks a lot for sharing these proposals, and hopefully we will see some very good announcement very soon by the UK government. Now, I would like to remind our participants to drop their questions into the Q&A box if they have some for Chris and also for Angelos. So please continue writing those questions in the box, and then we'll get back to them at the end of the presentation. So now I'm turning back to Angelos, who has been looking at the same issue in Belgium, where there has been some policy developments recently. So I've asked you, Angelos, to tell us a bit more about the situation in Belgium and your take on it.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Marion. I'm just gonna take a second to share my screen.
Sure.
I hope everybody can see my screen right now.
Yes.
Okay. So, no. Yes, now it works. So, first of all, this is a graph that shows the importance of the electricity to gas price ratio. So, as Chris mentioned, why do we want to correct the electricity to gas price ratio? It is because there is a correlation between having a lower ratio and the amount of heat pumps that are being installed in certain countries. And as we see in this graph, you can see the UK and Belgium, they are all the way to the right with the worst ratios. So it's no coincidence that the both of us are having this talk or this presentation today. And we need to move to the left if we want to decarbonize our homes. And it's very important that this happens because this is an immense hurdle. And as long as this shift doesn't happen, it will become financially, it's like a financial stranglehold for households. Because at the same time, ETS2 is around the corner, which will make fossil gas more expensive. But on the other hand, the electricity to gas price ratio in our countries is so unfavorable that you must be more or less mad to invest in a heat pump right now. And this is, I don't want to be competitive with the UK, but this is a comparison of the electricity to gas price ratios in Europe. And Flanders has the worst ratio in all of Europe right now. The current ratio is 4.6. It even got worse in like in 2025 in recent months. But what is also important is that this shows this is not like an inherent quality of electricity versus gas. It's based on a political choice because we see that our neighboring countries, they are boasting ratios that are well below 2.5, such as the Netherlands, France, and Luxembourg. So how did Belgium or Flanders get into this problem? Probably there was a very smart accountant that was working for the government and that said, instead of taxing people directly, let's do it via the electricity bill because everybody uses electricity. In this way, our budget is more in order and you uh, get punished less politically when the voting comes around every 5 or 4 years in our democracy, because it's less clear that you put those extra costs there. And they did this in two main ways. It's public service obligations and levies. And they both exist on the federal and Flemish level, but for a Flemish household, they feel both of these levies and PSOs. And most of the time, they finance social energy measures, public lighting, and also green electricity certificates, which is a scheme that was introduced in 2006 to promote renewable energy. The scheme now is dying out, but the legacy cost is still on the electricity bill. And it made the electricity bill explode, so that currently in 2025, 37% of the bill is linked to taxes and levies. And when we compare this to gas bill, like on the right of the slide, only 12% of the gas bill is taxes and levies. And you also see it clearly with the blue, like I named all the costs of all the parts of the energy bill. The blue parts are the inherent electricity cost, like the energy cost or the cost of distribution and the transmission cost. But all the red ones are basically political choices. And we also see that gas, on the gas bill, 63% of the bill is actually the energy cost. In electricity, that's only 36% because of all these additional costs. And something extra, which is, I guess, unique to Belgium, is that our gas TSO Fluxys has had a very smart strategy in the past of creating a gas hub. So it means that other countries are also financing the transmission costs in Belgium of our infrastructure. And that's why the TSO costs on the gas bill are very low, which again makes the competition with electricity harder. So which measures have been taken so far? Here on this slide, you can see an overview of the cost per kilowatt hour in euro of electricity for an average household, starting from 2021. And you could see in 2021, we were already talking about the tax shift, but there was no political will. But the energy crisis did change a lot of things to start rethinking the energy bill. So the first thing that was done was to have these public service obligations to transfer them, at least the federal parts, to a special duty. And the reason for that is because a special duty, you could actually move from energy to energy carrier. So you could move it from electricity to gas or to oil if you wanted to. Then our VAT was reduced, so our tax was reduced to 6%. Then after the peak of the energy crisis, they said, oh, we lost a lot of income because we reduced the VAT. So they re-increased the special duty, so it became bigger again. Then in mid-2023, energy providers were saying, oh, but we see an increase in imbalance costs because of renewable energy. We're going to find another part of the bill linked to that. And then in the beginning of 2025, there were new grid tariffs because of massive investments that are also needed in the TSO and DSO infrastructure. The electricity bill again jumped up. So yeah, here is a short summary of those measures. So the shift from PSO to duty, it's a federal measure, but it allows them to move them to fossil fuels. But in the federal coalition agreement, it is mentioned to be researched. And currently, we see that there is no political will to actually act upon, to actually shift them from electricity to gas. Then the VAT reduction, it was a good measure, but it's both on electricity and gas. But if I'm not mistaken, it will be illegal from 2030, according to the EU, to have a low VAT on fossil energy. So it will be corrected again, but rather late. And then the increasing tariffs due to grid investments and imbalance cost they are part of the energy transition. We expect the energy costs to become lower because of more renewables because they're cheaper. But to get access to those renewables, we need interconnectors to offshore wind farms and flexibility markets, which increase then the cost on the energy bill. And this is quite inconvenient because in the short term, the gas lobby, I would say, has been using all these announcements of extra costs on the energy bill as a reason to say, okay, fossil gas is getting more expensive with ETS2, and in general, gas exploration becomes more expensive anyhow, and depends on LNG. But electricity is also coming more expensive, so it's not only gas. One way to mitigate these costs in Belgium would be to take the windfall profits of the gas TSO. So they have an allowed income that they can make, and everything they make on top of that goes to like a regulated windfall profits account. You could decide, instead of using that account to finance new investments in the gas grid, we can use that money to lower the investment cost for the electricity TSO and electricity DSO.
Heads up that you have 3 minutes left, Angelos.
That's perfect. And here you see an overview of how it's by Bruegel of how your energy costs lower, but your network costs and charges because of imbalances would increase due to in the energy transition. So then the Flemish energy tax reform, as Chris said, basically there are three options which you can do to get those policy costs on electricity out of the bill. You can do a tax cut, which is absorbing the cost in the general budget. Tax shift, it's like moving costs from electricity to gas, or tax exemptions, like saying electricity used for heating will be lower. The Flemish case, they focused on the first two pillars, so the first and second option in Chris's presentation. So what did they decide? In 2028, the Flanders will shift 326 million from electricity to gas through three measures, like moving these costs from one bill to another, and also have a tax cut, like these green electricity certificates. They will be bought by funds from the ETS2 funds to absorb those costs out of the electricity bill. What is important in their communication in this thing is that they say on an annual basis, for an average household, the electricity bill will go down 100 euros and the gas bill will go up 100 euros. And this means that there will be budget neutrality for an average household, which is something they can sell politically to voters, because this has been the big hurdle for taking action on the electricity bill and gas bill, is that you don't want to increase cost for average household. And therefore, a tax cut was needed because everybody used electricity, but only about 70% of people use gas. So part of those costs have to be removed as well. But there are some concerns, even though the previous numbers that we saw were promised. The measures that they listed in the tax shift are quite inadequate to reach those 100 euros per year shift. But because the 100 euro per year was promised, we hope that the Flemish government will take measures to shift additional costs and then still reach their final targets. And the final target should be, after a tax shift, that your ratio is below 2.5. This is an illustrative graph of how it should work together with the ETS price. So this is my final slides. And here we see the results according to the Flemish government. They started in their scenario that the price ratio electricity gas price ratio is currently 4. Then after the Flemish tax reform, it would become 3.5. Then together with ETS, this would become 2.9. And if there is a federal tax shift, which isn't certain at all, it would become 2.2, which would be a very favorable ratio. But there are some discrepancies between their scenario and the scenario that we are calculating. Since then, the cost of gas has dropped significantly, while the cost of electricity hasn't. And the price ratio or our current price ratio, where we're starting from, is 4.6 and not 4. And the other thing is that they're counting on an ETS2 price of 60 euro per ton CO2, while we did our analysis with 45 euro, which is the starting price for a ton of CO2 in the ETS2. So we end up with only the Flemish measures and the ETS2, which is decided upon policy, to a ratio of 3.49, which isn't yet enough to fully unleash electrification of heating. So in conclusion, for us, this Flemish tax reform is a very, very important first step in the right direction, but it still lacks a bit ambition, because they only aim at moving 100 euro of the 185 euro in annual Flemish levies and taxes in the energy bill. So they could address more of them, and then hopefully we can get the federal government on board to do their part as well. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them in the Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Angelos. This was, I mean, it shows that you really need to pay attention to all the different pieces in order to make a solution which would work for everyone. So that's really fascinating. And thanks a lot for sharing these insights with us. So before we move to the Q&A, I'd like to invite participants who are not yet part of our mailing list, to register. So my colleague Davide will send the registration link in the chat. And I'm just going to give the floor to my colleague Louise, who has questions for both speakers.
Thanks so much, Marian and Chris and Angelos. They were great presentations, so thank you hugely. I think what you both did really effectively was clearly set out that there are options, that you've obviously clearly put a lot of thought into understanding and designing these options, and they're pretty innovative. Let's be honest. So I think the clear message that you've given is that there are sort of many ways that governments could do this. But you said it very clearly, Angelos, which is now it's a political choice. The fact that these costs are on these bills was a political choice in the first place, and now it's a political choice to do something about it. And that political choice obviously comes with some downsides. There are either implications of lost revenue through tax cuts, or through taking things that were previously paid on bills into government budgets, which again sort of has the same basic effect of in very tight fiscal situations. This is tricky. So this is really the world we're in, isn't it? In the reality of trying to encourage these changes. So my question to you is, having had the experience you've had, what are the kind of key takeaways that you might perhaps advise another government starting on this journey? What are the key messages to a government official that you might give about what to really look for and what to aim for in designing a kind of policy like this? I'm going to go to Angelos. You've taken your mute off,
like
so
I
I'm
can
going to
take
go
the floor. Yeah. Well, I think from the Flemish example, it's, I think, one of the most important promises that they made. It's going to be budget neutral for an average Flemish household, and that's key. I think a lot of people support climate goals, but in the end, like, their financial situation also needs to work. So you need to make sure that the impact on their bill is the same as it was before. And if they switch, it would be actually advantageous, so that there is an incentive. Yeah, The other thing is that you need to, I wouldn't call it fear mongering, but you need to tell the message that ETS2 is around the corner, at least in the EU. And this is going to have an impact. Like, we don't need to beat around the bush. It's going to have an impact on households. And actually, you're being a wise government if you are anticipating this policy and knowing, like, okay, the more households we can prevent from a fossil fuel lock-in, because if you buy a boiler, it's going to be there probably for 15 to 20 years. The more we avoid unnecessary additional costs in households. And okay, this is then on a local level, but I have to think a lot about the city of Mannheim in Germany, that they have decided we will cut off the gas grid by 2035. And the reasons they have stated is, we know gas is going to get more expensive. We're not going to beat around the bush. We're going to protect our citizens and households by, okay, being a bit stern, but trying to already get them on board with electrification, so that at the end of the road, we're not blamed for having like energy bills that explode. That would be the two main points.
Yeah, over to you, Chris. I mean, I think that point is, it's so much the point of governments, the responsibility of governments, isn't it, to provide this insight that people, in their businesses, running their households, don't necessarily have those insights into the future. Chris.
Yeah, I think the two takeaways from me would be, I mean, the first one is policymakers and also people advising policymakers need to understand the political context and the political appetite in the environment you're putting these recommendations into. And I think part of the challenge in the UK over many years was either mixed messaging from the political establishment, or even different parts of the political establishment, like the civil service, not understanding what the political appetite was at the top level. Because a lot of which of those, the three options that Angelos very clearly set out, the do you remove the levies, do you shift them, or do you do a targeted approach? All of that comes down to, what are your political priorities? Which are the ones are you willing to trade off? And I think we got caught up in that loop in the UK of saying, oh, we're willing to trade off on this one. And then you go down that road and then they go, oh, actually, that's a bit scary. Let's go down a different road. So knowing from the start which of those options is viable is really important. And I guess the second message I think is really important to land is, electrification is a key part of the economic story for the next decades and century. I mean, obviously we've got AI, we've got a lot of other like informational transformations going on, but electrification is like the story of industrial transformation and modernization, and also household modernization as well. So any country that doesn't have an electrification strategy doesn't, in my view, have a robust economic plan for the next century, which is quite a big statement. But I think is really important to get across that, like, regardless of what approach governments take on this, they need to address the electricity affordability point.
Thanks a lot, Chris. There are some questions on the chat about other elements of the bill, and I saw a question about grid costs. Would it make sense to also consider removing grid costs from electricity bills? What do you think? Perhaps, Angelos, do you want to go ahead with that one?
Yeah, my mic is on. It's a good question, because we see that they are increasing because of the need for more electricity infrastructure. I think there is a point to be made that some of those costs should also be absorbed, either be it by national governments or by the EU, because often these big projects also include interconnectors or connecting to offshore wind farms in the case of Belgium. And there is this whole idea of having like an energy island that has also interconnectors to other countries, such as the UK. So there is a point to be made that some of these costs could be absorbed. But I guess it's also important for the electricity TSO that they that they just, like, it's still a company that wants to grow, and their growth should also be based on certain realism, so that if all the costs are covered, they will just build whatever. So it also needs to be what the market needs at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I absolutely think there should be exploration of that idea. Whether or not, that's not to say that it's definitely the right approach for different countries, but I think it's certainly an area that we're thinking about increasingly, and we'll do more thinking about over the coming years. I think ultimately, for me, and I think Angelos alluded to this, it's not really a question of economics or policy. I think there's a rational argument for recovering these costs in either way from a kind of hard-nosed economist perspective. It really comes down to the politics of what is their political appetite for, and also, more pragmatic questions of, can you guarantee, if grid costs would say to be a responsibility of government budgets directly, can you guarantee that you would have appropriate levels of investment in networks? And that could go either way. You could either overspend or underspend. So I think it's definitely, the short answer is yes, I think it's definitely something we should be thinking about, or we should be thinking about whether there are parts of network costs that could go somewhere else other than levies. But there are a lot of factors to think about.
Thanks a lot, Chris. That's interesting, and potentially the topic of next webinar we should be thinking about. Now I'd like to come back to this the very topic of taxes and levies. Chris, you mentioned the option of having a targeted exemption. Can you tell us, so people have questions on the chat, how do you do that actually? Do you need to measure somehow where the electricity is consumed exactly? So how do you do that well? And also, what are the risks with such an approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very insightful question. That is one of the main practical challenges with a targeted approach. And I do often say to people, you are swapping political challenges for practical implementation challenges, and you've got to choose which of those you want to deal with. So there are, in response to the specific question, yes, you need some idea of the electric heating consumption. And I say electric heating because my view is that this should be broader than just heat pumps. It should be tech agnostic for electric heating. And you can do that in one or two ways, or at least we're exploring two ways in the UK. One is you estimate, you deem the consumption and just say everyone with a heating system, if we can validate they have that heating system, we give them a payment of this level. The other would be metered consumption, which sounds very challenging, but actually, given some regulatory changes that are coming in the UK over the next couple of years, I think actually is entirely possible that we could see all new electric heating systems with that sort of metering. So it is a challenge, but it's a very achievable challenge. And yeah, I mean, because there was a question as well about, have we been in discussions with regulators Ofgem? I should say, I mean, our understanding is that UK government is actively looking at a variant of the targeted discount at the moment. It's a little bit up in the air at the moment because we were expecting, as I said, a strategy to be published that included a very specific proposal on this. That's slightly in discussion at the moment because the UK is about to publish a new budget, and that could come with it some alternative things. But yes, but this is actively being explored in the UK, and so it's possible in the next couple of months, there might even be detailed policy proposals in the public domain. But yes, if anyone has questions on how you'd implement this, please get in contact, and we can discuss further.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was really useful. I think just to say, I believe it's Denmark as well. It's done a sort of similar approach, hasn't it? So that's another reference case for answering that question about actually how do you deem or predict, or is it a self? I think in Denmark, I think it's households with electric heating need to register themselves, so it's a sort of opt-in. So I think there is a little bit of learning coming, from a couple of different places now about how you could practically do that. So thanks so much for that answer. But I had a question for Angelos, actually. I mean, I think when you shared the proposal in Flanders, it's made up of quite a few different parts, isn't it? It's quite complex. I had to sort of, I think, read your slide a few times. And I think that complexity does come from quite a sincere effort that you outlined to ensure that bills are balanced, at the household level. But what's the payoff for that complexity, do you think? Is there, what are the downsides, as I say, to that complexity?
I think actually the electricity bill is just inherently complex. So there wasn't like a easy, elegant solution. Like if you would absorb all the costs, maybe this would be the easiest solution, but we're in an austerity government right now, so it's definitely not an option. So it had to be a combination of a tax shift and absorption of cost because, as I mentioned before, let's say 99.9% of Flemish households have electricity, but only 70% or so have gas. So if you would move all the costs to people consuming gas, then the budget neutrality for an average household would not be guaranteed. So you need to roam off some of these costs, and that's what's being absorbed. So that's actually why they did this two-step approach. But I think my opinion is it's rather elegant and quite good approach. They just could have gone a bit further, like moved a bit more cost, absorb a little bit more. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I was wondering, I mean, you have been thinking about it a lot, and your organizations are very involved in this discussion in your respective countries. I was wondering, what is the position of other advocacy groups across your countries? Did you reach a consensus, or are you seeing different positions emerging? Perhaps we can start with Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say we've seen different positions within the UK, and I think a lot of it does come down to different groups' assessments of what is politically viable. And and differing assessments, particularly of, how much is government willing to, I mean, Angelos mentioned, how much is government willing to put on the government books? How much is government willing to change gas bills? And then, if you don't think either of those are viable, you go on the targeted approach route. I would say it's very much in flux at the moment, given, as I said, that there's a lot of concern within the UK, very specifically at the moment, because the government has made some electoral promises around how much they will reduce energy bills by ahead of the next election. And I think the kind of increasing panic about whether they will be able to deliver those promises means that things that were previously ruled out are now being considered again, which again is kind of shaking the snow globe a little bit in the UK. But I would say broadly where we had landed in the UK was that the targeted approach was the only option that could command political support. As I said, watch this space. It's a strange time to be giving this presentation because the events of the next few weeks could be quite could either prove me right or prove me very, very wrong. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Angelos.
I would say in Belgium in general, like also zooming out of Flanders a bit, like companies have been on board, like installation companies, also heat pump companies, but also industry, they have been on board because if I think more and more CEOs realize that if they want to have a bright future in Northern Europe, then electrification is the way to go, and fossil fuels are not getting cheaper. So it wasn't only us civil society actors demanding a tax shift or tax reform of the energy bill. Was also industry. And actually, for I think, two past government cycles, a tax shift or something like it was always mentioned in the coalition agreement, but more under the terms of we will research or we will test out or we will, like, very vague formulation. And I guess what Chris also said is everybody was kind of on board until it comes to the implementation phase, and you have to make hard decisions, and that's always where it's got stuck. And then additionally, we have this multiple governments or regions thing that also plays. So for a while, the Flemish government was saying we will only take a measure if we reach an agreement with the federal level that they do their part as well. Luckily now our Flemish government has taken the first step, so that is not a stare down anymore, like who is going to make the first move. And I think this could also be a catalyzer for the federal government, but even the Walloon part, to also take action now, because well, the ice is broken, and yeah, it's free to begin for everyone.
And if I could just come back, actually, I mean, partly in reflection to what Angelos has said, the one thing where there is strong agreement on the UK from a very, very broad range of actors is that something needs to be done to tackle the electricity price to gas ratio. And the differences purely come from that assessment of what is government willing to do, which, to be honest, is largely a question for government to answer. But I would say, and another thing I would say off the back of that as well is, as has kind of been hinted at from the Flemish example, if governments aren't capable of dealing with all of the levy issue in one go, a kind of breaking it up into chunks and incrementally addressing different parts of it is also a valid way to approach this. I think we shouldn't be all or nothing on this. I think we should take what improvements we can get.
Thanks a lot. I see like a very interesting question popping in the chat about flexibility and revenues from flexibility. So basically, if we use our electric equipment flexibly, we can get lower prices in some countries for this electricity. And I was wondering whether you have considered, both of you, factoring in this impact into the projections you are doing on the electricity bill, because that might also change the picture a bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in on that, and I'm really glad it's been mentioned. Partly for two reasons. I mean, firstly, levies dampen out flexibility signals. So levies are also bad for flexibility, because if without levies, your off-peak and on-peak ratio was 3 to 1 or something like that. With levies, that just makes that ratio a lot smaller. So levies are bad for flexibility is the first point I've mentioned. The other point I'd mention is I absolutely think we need to look at flexibility a lot more in making the running cost case for electric appliances. I mentioned earlier the piece we did on heating bill reduction, and the key pillars to that heating bill reduction. One of them was reducing electricity prices. The second one was improving efficiency of heat pumps, installed efficiency of heat pumps. But the third one was flexibility. And each one of those 3 pillars delivered kind of roughly comparable savings. So, given all the political challenges with action on levies, we absolutely should be getting the most out of those savings on flexibility as well. So I think it's a really important question, and I'm glad that it's come up.
If I also may pick in on that question, I think like to put it in a framework, I think we currently have like 3 ways of having flexibility on your energy bill right now in Belgium. The first is if you have, instead of like a variable contract, you have a dynamic contract that really changes by every quarter, or like every 15 minutes. But the percentage of people having these type of contracts is very low. So we haven't made an analysis regarding what the impact would be. I guess if you're being smart with how you play, and if you have a well-insulated house that can store heat, like work as a heat battery, let's say, it could be very interesting. But I do not think it's very realistic or something realistic to assume that we can extrapolate this to all the households in Flanders in the next 10 years. I would think it will be more a niche like appliance. Then the second one is households that have that impose flexibility on themselves, let's say, because they have solar panels. And for them, it's very interesting to use more when their panels are producing. This business case has been studied already by different like by the government, but also private companies. And it's a favorable business case to have a heat pump and solar panels at the same time. And then the third way of flexibility is not super flexible, but it's in our tariffs of our distribution grids. There's a capacity like a capacity tariff, let's say. And if you use too much capacity, you get fined extra, and they take a bit the average of the maximum, and then you get fined for that maximum. But what is not good about it is that it doesn't play yet, or it doesn't work yet in sync with the renewable energy production. So it's not when you're using more electricity when there's actually a lot of production of renewables, you still get punished for it, or which is not the best right now, but it will probably be reviewed in the next tariff review. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for these insights. I'm afraid we're coming to the end of this very exciting webinar. I'd like to give Louise the floor for key takeaways. Louise, what did you learn from today's session?
I think we've learned so much. So the first thing, just say huge thanks. It's so valuable to hear from people who are, actually actively involved in understanding, supporting, proposing these solutions. And I think the key kind of message that you've both given, I think it is really clear, and I loved it. The message of electrification is now part of the economic story. This is for any government making political choices. Therefore, the prices of electricity are absolutely key, and they're absolutely essential. And we have solutions. That's come across really clearly as well. We've got the solution of absorbing costs into public budgets. That's been achieved in Germany, calculated to reduce bills by around 16%. Of exempting, as the Chris's proposal in the UK, that's been achieved in Denmark and credited with the reduction of the electricity to gas price ratio from 3 down to 2. Big impacts there. And then finally, the kind of rebalancing, moving costs from electricity to gas. And that's been done in the Netherlands. And now the Netherlands have the lowest gas to electricity price ratio of 1.5. And thinking about the comparison with the UK, the Netherlands uses about the same amount of gas for heating as the UK. So, you see the difference there in the pathways of very, very gas reliant countries when one country has actually achieved this change to take the gas price ratio down from 4 to 1.5. So the options are there. There's countries doing them. And so, and the last thing I'd say, and it's really great that the last question there, I think, led us on to the question of demand side flexibility, because I think after taxes and policy costs, that's actually the third point in our 8-point plan as well. And I think that is absolutely the next focus, to both bring costs down immediately, bills down immediately for people who can move their electricity use around. But also then, when people start doing that, it brings down system costs overall for everyone. So it's really a win-win-win. And so I think those, these measures all together, I think are absolutely key. So thank you so much for shedding some light and bringing that real world experience to the webinar today.
Thanks a lot. It was really fascinating. So now we're coming to the end of our time together. We will see you very soon, I hope, for another series of the Electrification Academy. You can register for our mailing list. I believe my colleague has put the link in the chat. In case you have issues doing that, just reach out to us, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have ideas for the next issues of the Electrification Academy. Have a nice day, and thanks a lot.